Imagine the life of a wealthy family, always at the height of opulence and control, with a son who struggles to fit in with his parents' rigid expectations. Now imagine that one fateful night, everything changes when they overhear a suspicious conversation that leads to a drastic decision: to expel and disinherit their son. What seemed like a devastating end for Lucas, their only son, turns into a surprising and inspiring journey. Prepare to see how the unexpected outcome of this story will make you rethink what true success and reconciliation mean. What you are about to discover is more shocking and moving than any other tale of redemption you have ever heard. Stay tuned, because the solution to all this pain and loss may be more incredible than you imagined. Check out if you are already subscribed to my channel, leave a like. The story begins in the Grand Montero Mansion, an imposing building that reflected the wealth and status of one of the most powerful families in the country. It was the kind of house that caught the eye of everyone who passed by, with its high walls, manicured gardens, and an iron gate that seemed to separate the outside world from a kingdom unto itself. Within this modern palace lived Paulo Montero, his wife Helena, and their only son Lucas. Paulo Montero was the patriarch of the family, a shrewd businessman known for his ability to turn any opportunity into gold. He had started with next to nothing, but over the years he built an empire that spanned everything from manufacturing to luxury properties. He was respected and feared by many, not only for the fortune he amassed, but for the ruthless way he ran his business. For Paulo, success was not just a matter of luck, but of discipline, hard work, and, above all, control. Helena, on the other hand, was the quiet force behind the throne. Elegant, always impeccable, she was the embodiment of class and grace. Helena looked after the family's public image, participating in charity events and keeping the Montero reputation pristine. But behind this perfect facade, there was a woman who also maintained an unshakable firmness about the values that governed the household. For her, traditions were sacred, and nothing, not even love for her son, could justify breaking with what had been established. Lucas, the only heir of the Montero family, grew up under the weight of these expectations. From an early age, he knew that he had no right to fail. Paulo and Helena raised him to be the next great leader of the family, the successor who would take the Montero name to even greater heights. Lucas had access to the best schools, the best teachers, the best opportunities. But while his parents were focused on molding him into the next head of the empire, Lucas felt a constant pressure that was slowly eroding his happiness. He loved his parents without a doubt, but there was a part of Lucas that yearned for something more, something that went beyond the traditions and rigidity that defined his life. He wanted to discover the world for himself, to make decisions that were not dictated by the expectations of others. This tension between Lucas's desire for freedom and Paulo and Helena's firm control was like a storm gathering on the horizon, waiting for the right moment to explode. The Montero family was known for its wealth, but also for its coldness. Family gatherings, gala dinners, social events, everything was carefully orchestrated to maintain the image of perfection. There was no room for flaws or weaknesses, and Lucas, who had always been seen as the future of the family, found himself increasingly suffocated by the life his parents had planned for him. This was life in the Montero household. A life of luxury, yes, but also of rigid rules and inflexible traditions. On the outside, everything seemed perfect, but within the walls of that mansion there was a silent battle being fought, a battle that no amount of money in the world could solve. And it was only a matter of time before this battle came to light, changing the fate of Paulo, Helena, and Lucas forever. Lucas Montero grew up surrounded by luxury and privileges that few could imagine, but his life was far from a bed of roses. From a young age, he was groomed for one purpose: to inherit and expand the empire that his father Paulo Montero had built with so much effort. This responsibility was immense, and Lucas felt its weight every day. His routine was meticulously planned, with no room for error or deviation. Every morning he started early, well before sunrise, when Lucas still felt trapped between sleep and wakefulness. While other young men his age might have slept a little longer, he was up and ready to face another day he had not chosen. Paulo insisted that success waited for no one, and Lucas had learned that he had no right to waste a single minute. Breakfast at the Montero mansion was not just a meal, but a strategic meeting. Paulo, always with the newspaper in hand, discussed the latest economic news, and expected Lucas to be up to date with everything. It was there, at the marble table, under the glow of the crystal lamps, that Lucas received his instructions for the day. "Lucas, today you will review the contracts for the new merger," his father would say, leaving no room for questioning. Lucas would nod, hiding his tiredness behind a polite smile. After breakfast, the Real marathon began. Lucas spent endless hours in meetings, reviewing reports, learning every detail of the vast Montero empire. He knew that any mistake could be fatal to the company, and worse still, to the trust his parents had placed in him. The pressure was suffocating, but he never complained. Paulo had always told him that Monteros don't cry, they don't give up, and they definitely don't fail. In the afternoons, while his childhood friends went out to play sports or simply relax, Lucas was immersed in more studies. Paulo hired the best tutors, who demanded impeccable performance from him. The young Montero learned about finance, global economics, risk management, topics that often seemed distant and abstract to him, but that Paulo considered vital. But there were moments, brief and furtive, when Lucas allowed his mind to wander. He dreamed of a different life, one where he could choose his own path. Sometimes, during the most boring meetings, he would imagine himself traveling the world, exploring different cultures, or even working on something creative, far from the numbers and contracts that dominated his life. He wanted to find his own identity, something that wasn't tied to the Montero name. Lucas's day ended late, often when the mansion was already silent and dark. Even after the office lights went out, his mind kept spinning, full of thoughts about what he still needed to do, about the expectations he needed to meet. The silence of the night only made the restlessness grow in his chest. He was tired, but not just physically. He was exhausted from living a life that deep down wasn't his. Lucas tried hard to please his parents, especially his father, who never seemed to be satisfied, no matter how much he dedicated himself. But despite all this effort, the feeling of emptiness persisted. He wanted more than just to follow the family legacy. He wanted to discover who he really was, far from the shadows of Paulo and Helena. And so, day after day, Lucas Montero lived in a routine that kept him trapped, while his dreams of a different life remained just that, dreams. But something inside him knew that this situation could not last forever. At some point, somehow, he would have to find a way to reconcile his parents' expectations with his own desires. And when that moment came, Lucas's world would change forever. One night, when the Montero mansion was plunged into a deep silence, broken only by the distant sound of the wind rustling the leaves in the garden, Paulo Montero found himself in his private office. It was a space that reflected his power. Mahogany shelves filled with business books, an imposing desk, and paintings of landscapes that, for him, represented past achievements. He was reviewing an important contract, but his thoughts seemed to wander, as if something was bothering him without him knowing exactly what. As Paulo tried to concentrate, he heard in the distance a voice that should not be there at that hour. It was Lucas. It was rare for his son to stay up so late, especially to answer phone calls. Curious, Paulo got up silently, leaving the office and walking through the dark, wide corridors of the house, until the voices began to become clearer. Outside Lucas's room, the door was ajar, allowing Paulo to hear the conversation without being noticed. He approached cautiously, driven by an unsettling feeling he couldn't ignore. Lucas spoke softly, but his words were clear enough for Paulo to catch the gist. "Yes, everything is ready. If everything goes as planned, this could change everything. It will be the beginning of a new phase." Paulo frowned. What was this plan Lucas was mentioning? And what great change could be coming? He knew his son well enough to know that Lucas rarely spoke with such conviction about anything personal. There was always a certain hesitation in his voice, a caution in every word he said, especially when the subject involved the future. But that night there was something different, a determination that Paulo had never heard before. As Lucas continued to talk, Paulo felt a wave of distrust growing inside him. He had always been a calculating businessman, who left nothing to chance, and the idea that Lucas was planning something without his knowledge made him deeply uncomfortable. What if Lucas was about to make a rash decision, something that could jeopardize the entire empire he had built? Or worse, what if his son was being influenced by someone from the outside, someone who wanted to take advantage of the vulnerability of a young heir? Paulo's mind began to race, formulating theories, imagining scenarios. each one more disturbing than the last. He had always believed that control was essential, and any sign that this control was slipping from his grasp was cause for alarm. At that moment, Paolo felt that something much bigger was at stake, something that could affect not only Lucas's future, but the fate of the entire Montero family. Without waiting for the conversation to end, Paolo silently retreated, his thoughts already racing. He needed to talk to Helena. He needed her to know what she had heard, so that together they could decide what to do. There was an urgency in the air, a feeling that they were on the brink of something unknown and potentially dangerous. A little later, in the couple's bedroom, Paolo told Helena everything. He talked about Lucas's words, his tone of voice, the strange conviction he had perceived. Helena, always so calm and rational, couldn't help but feel a shiver as she heard her husband's story. They knew their son, or at least they thought they did. But this conversation suggested that Lucas was hiding something that could be about to change the course of their lives. That night, while their son slept, Paolo and Helena lay awake, debating what to do. Should they confront him immediately, or wait and try to find out more? Distrust grew, eroding the trust they had always had in Lucas. And so tension began to creep into what had once seemed like an unshakable family, bringing with it the shadow of a change they were unsure whether they were ready to face. Little did Paolo and Helena know that this seemingly innocent conversation would be the beginning of a series of events that would test everything they believed about family, loyalty, and love. What was to come was something neither of them could have foreseen, and one that would change their lives forever. The next morning, the atmosphere at the Fortunate Mansion was charged with tension. Breakfast, which used to be a formal and silent meal, was now a storm waiting to break out. Paolo barely touched his food, his eyes fixed on Lucas, who in turn felt the weight of his father's gaze, but still didn't know why he was so tense. After breakfast, Paolo called Lucas to the office, the same space where they had so often discussed the family business. But this time Lucas noticed that the environment seemed more suffocating, as if the walls were closing in around him. Paolo was serious, and the silence that followed the invitation was more deafening than any words he could have said. As soon as they entered the office, Paolo closed the door with a sudden movement, as if he were isolating his son from the outside world. He stood in front of Lucas, arms crossed, and without beating around the bush began the confrontation. "Lucas, last night I heard your conversation on the phone," Paolo began without looking away. "I heard you talking about a plan, something that could change everything. I want to know now, what are you planning?" Lucas, taken by surprise, felt his stomach churn. He knew that the conversation with his friend the night before was about something important to him, but he had no idea that his father would have heard it. Trying to remain calm, he began to answer. "Dad, I was just talking to a friend about..." But before he could finish his sentence, Paolo interrupted him, his voice filled with restrained anger. "Don't make excuses, Lucas. Do you think I don't realize what's going on? Do you think you can make decisions behind my back without consulting me? I've always trusted you, but now it seems like you're about to betray that trust we've built over all these years." With each word Paolo said, Lucas felt as if an invisible wall was rising between them. He had never seen his father so furious, and it left him speechless for a moment. Paolo continued, his voice now filled with disappointment. "I dedicated my life to making sure you had everything, that you were prepared to take on what's ours, and this is how you repay me? With secrets and hidden plans?" Lucas tried to defend himself, his voice shaking a little, but still determined. "Dad, I'm not hiding anything that goes against the family. What I want is to find my own path, to do something that's also mine. This isn't a betrayal, But Paolo, blinded by anger and fear of losing control over the family's destiny, didn't let him continue. "Your own path? What path do you think you can follow alone? Everything you have, Lucas, comes from the hard work of this family. You can't just throw it away because you want to follow some foolish dream that you didn't even have the courage to tell me about before." The argument became more intense, with words being said without thinking, emotions surfacing and hurting both of them. For Paolo, the idea that Lucas could be planning something without his knowledge was an affront. He had always believed that the right path for his son was to follow in the family's footsteps, to continue the legacy that he and Helena had built. Any deviation from that path was, for him, a sign of ingratitude and disrespect. Lucas, on the other hand, felt that he was finally trying to claim something that was his. But how could he explain this to a father who had always believed that duty came above all else? Every word he tried to say was cut off by Paolo's frustration, and Lucas began to realize that there might be no way to make his father understand his feelings without causing a deep rupture. At the height of the argument, Paolo, overcome by anger, made an accusation that cut Lucas deeply. "If you continue with this idea, Lucas, you will be betraying not only me, but the entire legacy we have built. It will be as if you are turning your back on everything this family represents." Those words hung heavy in the air, and Lucas, feeling the impact of what he had just heard, realized that the conversation had reached a point of no return. The trust that had always united father and son was now fractured, and he knew that from that moment on nothing would be the same. At that moment, Lucas realized that the desire to find his own path was about to trigger consequences that he had not foreseen. And for Paolo, the idea of losing control over the future of the Venturoso Empire was more terrifying than anything else. The confrontation, which should have been a simple conversation, had turned into an emotional battle that would change the fate of both forever. Paolo and Helena were in a whirlwind of emotions after their confrontation with Lucas. The argument had left deep scars on both of them, and the air in the Venturoso's mansion seemed heavier than ever. Paolo was inconsolable, pacing back and forth in the office, while Helena tried to calm her own nerves. For them, the decision they were about to make was necessary, although painful. After hours of discussions, the decision was made. Without further ado, Paolo called Lucas to the office, where Helena was already waiting, sitting next to the imposing mahogany desk. When Lucas entered, his eyes met his parents', and he knew something was very wrong. The silence was almost deafening. Paolo, with a cold and resolute voice, began to speak, but there was a harshness in his tone that Lucas did not recognize. "Lucas, after what happened, we can no longer continue as before. You betrayed our trust, and this house, which has always been your home, can no longer be your place." Lucas was in shock, his heart racing. He tried to protest, to explain once more, but Paul held up his hand, silencing him. "There is nothing more to be said. You have made your choice, and now you will have to face the consequences." Helena, who had been silent until then, finally spoke, but her words were cutting. "We love you, Lucas, but you forced us to make this decision. From now on you are on your own. There will be no more support, neither financial nor emotional. You are disinherited." The words hit Lucas like a punch in the stomach. He felt the ground open beneath his feet. He never imagined that the situation would reach this point, that his own parents would throw him out of the house and cut all ties with him. But there he was, listening to those words, unable to believe that it was real. With no more arguments, with nowhere to run, Lucas understood that he had no other choice but to accept the fate that had been imposed on him. He left the office, each step heavy, as if he were walking away from everything he knew. At the door of the mansion, the employees looked at him with regret, but no one dared to say anything. It was as if they were all trapped in a destiny that they could not change. With only the clothes on his back, Lucas walked through the gates of the fortunate mansion, feeling more alone than ever. The cold night wind hit his face, as if the world outside was trying to wake him up to the harsh reality that awaited him. There was no more luxury, no more comfort, no more family. All he had was what he was wearing at that moment and the uncertainty of a future he could barely imagine. As he walked through the dark, empty streets, Lucas felt a mixture of fear and freedom. On the one hand, the prospect of being on his own terrified him, but on the other, there was a small flame of determination burning in his chest. He knew that, from that moment on, he would have to face the world alone, without the support of the fortunate, but also without the ties that tied him to a destiny he never chose. Paolo and Helena's drastic decision was like an open wound, but it was also the beginning of a new journey for Lucas. A journey that would lead him to discover who he truly was, without the expectations of his family, without the weight of a legacy he never asked to carry. In that moment, as the lights of the mansion faded behind him, Lucas made a silent promise to himself. He would survive, no matter what the future held. And so Lucas set out on his path, with nothing but his clothes and a quiet determination, knowing that what lay ahead would be the greatest challenge of his life, but also knowing that, for the first time, he was in control of his own destiny. When Lucas left the imposing gates of the Mansion of the Fortunate, he entered an unfamiliar world, a world that had always been there, but one he had never truly experienced. Life outside his home was nothing like the comfort he had always known. Reality hit him like a cold, unforgiving wave, but at the same time, there was something invigorating about being alone, with no one to tell him what to do or how to act. The first few days were the hardest. Lucas, who had never had to worry about where to sleep or what to eat, now found himself without a roof over his head. He slept in hostels in small simple rooms very different from the luxury he was used to. Each night was a new lesson in humility. The noise of the streets, the pulsating life of the people around him, all of this showed him that the world was much bigger and more complex than he imagined. With no money or resources, Lucas began looking for a job. The rejection was a new and painful experience, but it was also an important learning experience. After many attempts, he got a job in a small neighborhood bookstore. It wasn't the glamorous job he was used to, but there was something magical about that environment full of stories. The smell of books, the sound of pages turning, and the simple pleasure of helping customers find what they were looking for gave Lucas a sense of purpose he had never felt before. But what really kept Lucas motivated during those difficult days was the idea that he could finally work on a personal project he had always dreamed of but never had the courage to pursue. Far from the stifling expectations of his family, he began to pursue a lifelong passion, creating an app to connect people who shared literary interests. It was something he had always wanted to do, but had never had the freedom or support to get started. Every night, after long hours at the bookstore, Lucas would sit in his small rented room and work tirelessly on his project. Every line of code, every interface design, every feature he developed was a small victory, a step closer to realizing his dream. He knew the road would be long and full of challenges, but for the first time he was working towards something that was truly his. As time went on, Lucas began to feel a new freedom in his life. Without the chains of family expectations, he discovered that he had more potential than he had ever imagined. The simple life, without the luxuries and comforts of the mansion, taught him to value the little things, to appreciate effort and perseverance. Every hardship he faced, every obstacle he overcame, strengthened him and made him realize that he was capable of much more than his parents or even he himself could have imagined. And so Lucas moved forward, building his life from scratch, but with unwavering determination. The freedom he found outside the walls of the Venturoso mansion was not easy, but it was authentic. He was finally living the life he had always wanted, without the shadows of a legacy that was not his. And in doing so, Lucas not only survived, but flourished, finding within himself a strength and passion he never knew existed. Now each day was a new adventure, and the project he had dreamed of for so long began to take shape. Far from the expectations and pressures of his family, Lucas discovered that true wealth was not found in material possessions, but in the freedom to follow his own path, to do what he loved, and to create something that reflected who he truly was. And it was in this new life, built with his own hands, that Lucas finally found the peace and happiness he had been searching for. The days turned into weeks and the weeks into months. Lucas, working tirelessly on his idea, watched his project take shape and begin to grow. Each small achievement, each problem solved, fueled his determination. And so what began as a simple idea, a dream he had quietly nurtured, began to grow into something much bigger. Lucas has always believed in the power of human connections, and that is what guided the development of his app. He wanted to create a space where people could meet, share their passions, and create genuine bonds through literature. At first, the app was modest, used by only a few people, but Lucas's dedication to improving it and making it more accessible began to attract attention. Word spread organically. Satisfied users began recommending the app to their friends, who in turn did the same. Lucas watched each new sign-up, each new interaction, feeling a sense of satisfaction he had never experienced before. For the first time, he was building something that was entirely his, without the shadow of the Venturoso name, without the crushing expectations of his family. As the user base grew, Lucas realized he had something special on his hands, something that could truly make a difference in people's lives. He began investing even more time and resources into developing the app, introducing new features and expanding the team. Even with limited resources, he remained focused, knowing that he was on a path that would take him where he always wanted to be, in control of his own destiny. And then the unexpected happened. A major publisher, impressed by the success of the app and the impact it was having on the literary community, contacted Lucas. They saw in his creation a unique opportunity to connect readers and writers in an innovative way, and were willing to invest in the project. It was the first major recognition Lucas had received, and he knew he was on the right track. With the support of the publisher, Lucas was able to expand the app even further, reaching new markets and exponentially increasing the user base. The project that started in a small rented room had now become a thriving company, and Lucas, who had previously walked the streets with only the clothes on his back, was now starting to build his own fortune. Success was not just financial. Lucas gained respect and admiration in the community, not only for his intelligence and vision, but also for his humility and determination. He was seen as an example, living proof that it is possible to reinvent yourself, that adversity can be transformed into opportunity if you have courage and perseverance. The media began to pay attention to his story. Articles were written, interviews were requested, and Lucas's name, now separated from the Venturoso surname, became synonymous with innovation and success. He became a respected figure not because he was the son of a wealthy family, but because he had built something significant on his own. Lucas looked back on everything he had achieved and felt a mixture of pride and gratitude. He knew that the path had not been easy, but every hardship faced, every obstacle overcome, had led him to this moment. And now he was a different man, someone who had found his own value, away from the shadow of his family, creating his own legacy. And so what began as a solitary dream became a prosperous reality. Lucas, who had once been thrown out of his house with nothing, was now at the top of a successful business, not only rebuilding his life, but exceeding all expectations. And for the first time in a long time he felt truly free. While Lucas was thriving away from the fortunate, life at the mansion, which had previously seemed unshakable, was beginning to fall apart. Paolo and Helena, who had always had complete control over their finances and business, began to face a scenario they could never have foreseen. The economy changed, and with it the fortunate's fortunes. It all started with an investment that seemed promising. Paolo, confident in his ability to turn any business into a success, bet a significant amount on a new venture. But the market, always unpredictable, took a turn. What seemed like a safe bet turned into a disaster. The investment, instead of bringing the expected profits, generated huge losses. Paolo watched in disbelief as his wealth, which had been built with so much effort and care, began to diminish. This first blow was only the beginning. Other investments, which had previously been reliable sources of income, began to fail in succession. Companies in which Paolo and Helena had a stake began to go bankrupt, and the value of their shares plummeted. In a short time, the financial situation of the Venturosos was in free fall. What had once been a life of luxury and security was now turning into a nightmare. Paolo, a man accustomed to being in control, felt the ground disappearing from under his feet. He spent sleepless nights trying to find a way out, a way to turn the situation around. But the more he tried, the more things seemed to slip away from his hands. Helena, who had always been Paolo's partner in all aspects of life, also felt the weight of the crisis. The stress affected both of them, and the atmosphere at the Venturoso mansion became increasingly tense and somber. The employees, who had served the family loyally for years, began to notice the changes. Layoffs began to happen. The staff, which had previously been numerous and provided impeccable service, was reduced to a few employees who tried to keep up appearances in a mansion that was beginning to show signs of decay. The opulence that had once defined the lives of the fortunates now became a burden. Paolo and Helena, who had always prided themselves on their stability and their position in society, now found themselves in an unimaginable situation. They began to cut expenses, sell properties, and try to save what was left of their fortune. But the hardest blow was not just financial. It was a blow to their pride, to the image they had built over the years. The glamorous parties at the mansion, the charity events, all of this began to disappear. The friends who had once surrounded them at all times began to drift away. The society in which the fortunates were revered now whispered about their downfall. Rumors spread quickly, and the position that Paolo and Helena had maintained in high society began to be shaken. In the midst of it all, a painful truth began to dawn on them. They missed Lucas. Not just as the son they had once loved, but as someone who could have been an ally, someone with fresh ideas, a different perspective who might have helped them find a way out. But pride, the same pride that had driven them to disown Lucas, now prevented them from seeking any kind of reconciliation. The decision they had made in a moment of anger now felt like one of the biggest of their lives. Paolo and Helena were, for the first time in a long time, unsure of where to turn. The mansion, which had once been a symbol of power and success, now seemed like a prison, a constant reminder of everything they had lost. And so, the couple who had always had everything at their fingertips, who had lived a life of excess and comfort, found themselves in a position they had never imagined, on the brink of financial and emotional collapse. The upheaval in the lives of the fortunate was profound and devastating. They who had once been synonymous with success and wealth, now faced an uncertain future, with their fortunes in decline and their hopes dashed. And while they struggled to get back on their feet, the world around them continued to spin, indifferent to their downfall. Years have passed since Lucas left the fortunate mansion, and his life has changed radically. He built a fortune based on his own effort and creativity, turning his idea into a remarkable success. Over time, Lucas has become a respected name in the technology sector and a generous benefactor to various causes. Life, meanwhile, went on for Paolo and Helena. The financial crisis had left deep scars, and they struggled to regain the prestige and stability they had lost. The mansion, which had once been a symbol of opulence, was now marked by the signs of a less exuberant life. The fortunate ones still tried to maintain their dignity, but the weight of adversity was evident. It was at a charity event that fate brought Lucas and his parents together again. The occasion was a gala organized to raise funds for a noble cause, something that, ironically, reflected the values that the family had always held. The event was held in a large ballroom of an elegant hotel, decorated with lush flowers and sparkling lights. There was a sense of formality in the air, with elegant guests and the promise of an evening of solidarity and hope. Lucas, who was now a successful man, was among the sponsors of the event. With a confident smile and a well-tailored suit, he entered the room, carrying with him the aura of someone who had found his place in the world. His eyes moved around the room, admiring the beauty of the surroundings and feeling fulfilled at being able to contribute to such an important cause. He was far from the shadows of his old life, with a new identity that he had built with so much effort. Meanwhile, Paolo and Helena, dressed in their best clothes and making a visible effort to keep up appearances, were present as representatives of their foundation, which was still trying to recover from financial losses. They were there to show that, despite the difficulties, they still cared about the well-being of others. It was then that, as he took the stage to give a speech about the importance of the cause, Lucas's name was announced as the largest donor of the night. The room fell silent, and all eyes turned to the man who stood up to accept the recognition. Lucas took the stage with a calm smile, but what happened next took everyone by surprise. As Lucas delivered his speech, his eyes met those of his parents in the audience. Paolo and Helena were seated in the front row, and the surprise and shock were evident on their faces. The magnitude of Lucas's success was clear. Not only had he exceeded all expectations, but he had also become a pillar of generosity and success. When Lucas had finished his speech and made a gesture of thanks, he stepped off the stage and, without hesitation, addressed Paolo and Helena directly. The encounter was charged with a mix of emotions. Paolo, who had always been the man of control and pride, now seemed lost, almost broken by the reality he was confronting. Helena, for her part, had tears in her eyes, a combination of surprise and regret that was palpable. Lucas approached them with a serious look, but also with a tone of respect. He knew that this was a delicate moment, and that it was full of emotions. With a firm voice he said, "I never imagined that we would meet like this, but it's good to see that, despite the adversities, we are all still here." Paolo and Helena, taken by surprise, tried to find words to express what they felt. There was a heaviness in the atmosphere, a mixture of pride and shame. Paolo, with a choked voice, finally managed to say, "Lucas, we have no words to express how surprised and in a way embarrassed we are. We never imagined that you would go to this." Lucas looked at them with an understanding expression. "I understand. Life is full of surprises and twists and turns. What matters now is what we do with what we have. I am here to help, as I have always wanted to." The meeting was brief but full of meaning. There was no need for more words. Lucas's look of respect and compassion was enough to show that he had overcome his difficulties and was at peace with his past. And for Paolo and Helena, the encounter was a painful and inspiring reminder of the potential they had ignored and the choices they had made. That night, as the event continued and guests prepared to enjoy the gala, Lucas left with the certainty that he had found his purpose. Paolo and Helena, in turn, left with a new understanding, an acknowledgement of their son's success, and a reminder that even in the greatest adversity, dignity and respect were still possible. The unexpected encounter not only marked the end of a chapter, but also opened doors to new understandings and reconciliations. And as the evening unfolded, the stories of Lucas and the Venturosos intertwined in ways no one could have foreseen, revealing that, in the end, what really matters is the ability to grow, learn, and eventually reconnect. As the charity gala progressed and the guests enjoyed the evening, an atmosphere charged with emotion hung over the Venturoso mansion, now transformed into a setting of reconciliation and hope. Lucas had emerged as the biggest donor of the evening, a gesture that not only impressed everyone but also deeply touched Paolo and Helena, who were among those present. After Lucas's speech and the brief but intense meeting with his parents, the event continued with a sense of anticipation in the air. Lucas, with his calm posture and serene gaze, made a conscious effort not to draw any more attention to himself, preferring to observe and reflect on what had happened. The Venturosos were stunned. The mansion, which used to be a symbol of power and wealth, now seemed almost too small for the weight of the situation. Paolo and Helena, who had previously stood out with confidence, were now immersed in deep reflection. Sitting at the main table, they exchanged looks of understanding and shame. The magnitude of Lucas's success and the humility with which he dealt with it all served as a painful mirror for his own choices and actions. The evening was drawing to a close, and the guests were beginning to disperse, but Paolo and Helena were still paralyzed by the weight of what they had experienced. Lucas, who had left the party for a brief moment of privacy, decided it was time to act. He knew that, despite all the past resentments, what mattered now was finding a path to reconciliation and healing. Lucas returned to the ballroom, his presence still discreet, but with a quiet determination in his steps. He approached Paolo and Helena, who were sitting alone, away from the hustle and bustle of the party. With a gentle smile, he knelt beside his parents, looking at them with a look that mixed understanding and compassion. "Dad, Mom," Lucas began, his voice full of sincerity, "I know that time and words cannot erase the past, but I believe that we can find a new beginning. I would like to offer my help. If you need support, guidance, or even a helping hand to help you recover what was lost, I am here." The silence that followed was filled with meaning. Paolo and Helena were immersed in a sea of emotions. The shame and regret were evident on their faces, but there was also a spark of hope. The idea that their son, someone they had pushed away and ignored, was willing to reach out and offer help was an unexpected and profound gift. Paolo, his voice cracking and his eyes filled with tears, finally found the words. "Lucas, we failed you in so many ways. We never imagined this could happen, and now we see how valuable you truly are. We accept your offer with gratitude and an open heart." Helena, with tears streaming down her face, added, "We are so sorry we didn't see this sooner. The truth is, it was never about the money or the status. What really matters is love and family. And now we are ready to rebuild with you by our side." Lucas' reaction was a combination of relief and joy. He stood up, hugging his parents with genuine affection. The hug that followed was a mix of emotions with tears and smiles. It was the perfect representation of a moment of reconciliation, where love and forgiveness finally triumphed over pride and resentment. The night ended with a feeling of renewal and hope. The Venturoso family, which had faced so many hardships and separations, was now taking the first step towards healing wounds and rebuilding bonds. Lucas, who had come a long way through struggle and success, had shown that true value did not lie in possessions or appearances, but in love and mutual support. The reconciliation was not just an act of forgiveness, but a commitment to starting over. And so, under the soft lights of the ballroom and with the distant murmur of the gala, the Venturoso family began to walk a new path together. A path where understanding, empathy, and love were now the foundations of their future.